Lovely students, welcome back to another exciting literature class. Today's class, we're going to be looking at a very interesting poem titled BINSEY POPLARS by G.M. Hopkins. BINSEY POPLARS by G.M. Hopkins. BINSEY POPLARS is also a poem known as Failed. It's a poem known as Failed, 1979. That's the normal name for the poem if you're checking for the poem in your books. So we're going to be looking at the behavioral objectives. During the course of this lesson, we're going to be looking at the background of the poet and the background of the poem. We're going to be looking at the summary/subject matter of the poem, analyzing the poetic devices employed in the poem, as well as Poplar's use of imagery and symbolism in the poem. Now, this is G.M. Hopkins. This is G.M. Hopkins. We're going to be doing a brief background of the poet G.M. Hopkins. Gerald Manley Hopkins was born on 28 July 1884 in Stratford, Essex, England. He was one of the greatest poets of the Victorian era, the 18th to 19th century social revolution. He burnt all his poems and did not write for many years when he decided to become a priest. His major themes were based on nature and religion. He died on the 8th of June 1889 in Dublin, Ireland. This is the brief background of the poet Gerald Manley Hopkins, the writer of the poem BINSEY POPLARS. So, we're going to be looking at the background of the poem. Hopkins, on a visit to a riverbank he knew from his student days, was upset to find a row of mature aspens cut down. Aspens are like trees. Cut down the wood used for break blocks for the railway industry. He was so shocked. It's like waking up one morning and walking down to Millennium Park and discovering that, oh, they've cut down all the trees in Millennium Park. The shock you'll be feeling at that moment is the same shock that G.M. Hopkins was feeling when he saw all the mature aspens being cut down and their wood used for break blocks for the railway industry. He felt this was wanton destruction, this was uncalled for, this was just waste, an attack on nature. Remember, his themes are always on nature and religion and the divine energy at work within nature. He believes also that they are disrupting God's work in nature by cutting down the trees. So through poetry, he was able to redress the balance and to restore the divine element, and in so doing, come to terms with his own internal struggles. So we can see that from the poem, we discover that G.M. Hopkins had internal struggles with himself, and then upon seeing the cutting down of those mature aspens, he felt that it was an attack on nature and an attack on the spirituality surrounding nature, and that he needs to talk about it. He needs to ensure that this should stop. So we're going to be reading the poem Failed, 1879. My aspens dear, whose airy cages quelled or quenched in leaves the leaping sun. All failed are all failed. Of a fresh and following folded rank, not spared, not one, that dandled is sandaled, shadow that swam or sank, on meadow and river and wind-wandering weed-winden bank. Oh, if we but knew what we do, when we delve or hew, hack and crack the growing green, since country is so tender, to touch her being so slender, that like this sleek and singing ball, but a prick will make no eye at all, even where we mean. Continuation of the poem Failed. To mend her we end her, when we hew or delve, after commas cannot guess the beauty beam. 10 or 12, only 10 or 12, strokes of havoc on self, the sweet especial scene, rural scene, a rural scene, sweet especial rural scene, that is the poem Failed by G.M. Hopkins. Now we are going to be analyzing the poem itself. G.M. Hopkins was working as a priest's assistant in Oxford, England. On the 13th of March 1879, he was moving around the north of the city, decided to take a stroll. He came to the little village of BINSEY, and he was shocked to find that a row of aspen trees, or a long line of tall trees along the river Thames, had been felled. Like they had cut down a major part of the trees in the little village of BINSEY. He was really shocked, like he couldn't even absorb it quickly. All failed are all failed. He condemned this deliberate action of cutting down some valuable trees in the village of BINSEY. He was against it totally. He compared the lines of threes to a rank of soldiers, of a fresh and following folded rank. It was like they had cut down a whole rank of soldiers. In the second stanza, there is an exclamation of sorrow, horror, and sadness. Oh, if we but knew what we do when we delve or heal. This means that nature is fragile, and any damage done to it will make nature lose its beauty. And it's trying to make everybody see reason why felling trees is wrong, because you're killing nature and making nature lose her beauty. If we're looking at the analysis of this poem, we're going to be seeing that G.M. Hopkins was just sad. He was disappointed that they were felling the trees for things that did not even make sense to him, and he needed to push for them to stop felling the trees. Any attempt to interfere with nature is an act of irreversible destruction, because he believes that nature connects with the spiritual, and if you're harming nature, you are harming the spiritual, and you are bringing about destruction or your life. Where we mean to mend her, we end her. When we heal or delve, he's trying to tell us that spiritual goes along with nature, and if you're doing anything to her, if you're doing anything to nature, you are doing something to spiritual, and you're going to bring destruction and misery upon yourself. The unborn generations will not have knowledge of beauty of the countryside before humans thoughtlessly destroy it. Only 10 or 12 strokes of havoc on self. He is scared that the unborn generations will come and never see this beauty of nature, because we will keep cutting. Even today, the chairs we sit on, the tables we used to eat, majority of the things we use in our today's society come from trees that have been cut down. Nature absorbs the excess sun, and if you keep cutting down the trees, we are destroying nature, and we are detaching ourselves from the aspect of spirituality. That is what Gerald Manley Hopkins was trying to tell us in his poem BINSEY Poplars, Failed, 1879. Now, we're going to be looking at the lovely poetic devices in this wonderful poem. Our first poetic device would be the language in this lovely poem. The poem is complicated by unusual construction of sentences. There are some words that are used in special forms. On self, to ruin and destroy. Especial means something that is special or important. Dandled means dangled. Felled, deliberate and wanton destruction of the aspen trees. So there's an unusual pattern in his sentence construction. That's the style of writing during the Victorian era. Now, we will be seeing that in the second stanza, there were punctuation marks which range from a dash, an exclamation mark, a colon, to commas. We saw the consistent use of punctuation marks in the poem. Now, let's look at the figures of speech in BINSEY Poplars by G.M. Hopkins. The figures of speech. The first figure of speech is biblical allusion. The poet used biblical allusion in Luke 23, verse 24. Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. In the poem, we are seeing it as we have, oh, if we but know what we do. So this is the connection between the Bible passage, Luke chapter 23, verse 24, versus the line in the poem, oh, if we but know what we have, in the second stanza. Now, let us look at another figure of speech. We're going to be looking at another figure of speech. Personification. Personification. Nature was considered as a woman, since country is so tender, to touch her being so slender. Hers is used for countryside. Personification. The tree's shadow look like someone's legs with sandals on. Lines 6 to 8. Another figure of speech we're going to be seeing in this lovely poem is the use of simile. The countryside is compared with the seeing eyes in lines 14 to 15, that like this sleek and seeing ball, but a prick will make no eye at all. So we can see the use of simile in this poem. It means that the eye is a delicate thing and it should be taken care of properly. So he is comparing the countryside to the eye. We protect our eye. That same thing goes to the countryside. We should also learn to protect it. And then we're having another figure of speech, which is visual imagery. Visual imagery. The whole poem creates a visual image that poplars lining the river near BINSEY are being cut down, airy cages. They are providing shades, but all the poplars that are lining the river near the BINSEY have been cut down. They have been cut down. The entire picture of destruction is visual for us. Delve or hew, to dig or cut down trees. The poet has been able to create a visual imagery for us to see and understand what he's trying to say through the poem. So now we've come to the end of our lovely class, where we've discussed this poem, BINSEY Poplars by G.M. Hopkins. We've also seen the poetic devices as well as the figures of speech. Now, we're going to be doing our usual tradition, which is evaluation. So, our evaluation today comments on the poet's use of repetition and alliteration in the poem. The poet's use of repetition and alliteration in the poem. So, my lovely and wonderful students, we've come back to the end of our lovely class, BINSEY Poplars by G.M. Hopkins. In our next class, we're going to be looking at the themes of this lovely poem. Until then, it's bye for now. Bye-bye.